Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be taking a look at egalitarianism,
Yeah.
which is, a big concept, a
Huge.
huge concept, and
Yeah.
especially relevant, I think, for anyone with a philosophical background.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be looking at this through the lens of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy,
That's right.
their entry on egalitarianism,
hmm
and going really deep into it.
And really taking it apart,
Yeah.
and looking at some of the arguments for and against it, too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when people hear egalitarianism, they think, oh, everyone gets the same.
Yeah.
But,
Which is kind of a misunderstanding.
yeah, more nuanced than that.
It is.
Yeah.
It really gets down to this idea of equal moral worth.
Right.
And so that doesn't necessarily mean everyone gets the same outcome.
Yeah.
It's more about how are we considering people's interests and needs and rights.
Right. And even if you consider yourself maybe not a full-blown egalitarian,
Yeah.
you might still support some
Absolutely.
forms of equal treatment.
Yeah,
Well,
like voting, right? Or access to healthcare. These are things that I think, most people in modern society are in favor of.
Yeah.
And that really just kind of highlights that there are different types of equality.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Let's dive into that then.
Okay.
One that comes to mind for me is this idea of equality of opportunity,
Okay.
which I always think of as like leveling the playing field.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about trying to make sure that people have the chance to succeed regardless of the circumstances they're born into.
Right.
So not letting things like social class or race or gender or other arbitrary factors determine a person's chances in life.
Right. And so
Yeah.
from what I remember in the entry, it was like even within that,
Yeah.
there's formal equality of opportunity
Right.
versus fair equality of opportunity.
That's right. Yeah. And so formal equality opportunity basically means that legally speaking, no one is barred from pursuing opportunities.
Okay.
So anyone can apply for a job or, run for office. But fair equality opportunity is a little bit more demanding.
Right. It's like getting rid of even those like
Getting rid of the
subliminal advantages that come from being born into
subtle
wealth.
Yeah, the subtle unearned advantages.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like social connections, the support system you have at home.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Seems like a much more
Yes.
difficult goal to actually accomplish.
It's a much more ambitious goal.
Yeah.
You can imagine a society where like even the best intentions of parents to, give their kids a leg up are somehow neutralized.
Right.
I mean, how would you even do that?
Yeah. What about those parents that like
Right.
invest in extra tutoring or,
Exactly.
music lessons and all that stuff?
Yeah.
Is that?
Those are the kind of things you'd have to think about.
Yeah. And even if we did somehow level that playing field,
Yeah.
how do you even measure that?
Right. How do you measure it?
Yeah. So it's a lot of,
It's a lot to think about.
yeah, a lot to think about.
Yeah, and there's no simple solution.
So we've got this equality of opportunity,
Right.
but then there's also this idea of equality of condition,
That's right.
which I think is where it gets really interesting because,
This is where the rubber meets the road.
yeah,
Because you have to decide, what are we trying to equalize?
right.
So the Stanford Encyclopedia lays out a bunch of different contenders
Yeah.
for what we might try to equalize.
And they all have their own, like,
yeah.
philosophical
Obviously,
issues.
they're all philosophy from here on out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one that they brought up was lock-in rights,
Right.
which to me, I always think of like individual liberties.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Individual liberties and also property rights.
Right.
And even within locking rights, there's a sort of spectrum of interpretation,
Right. Yeah, like from the right wing to the left wing.
Yeah. So on the right, you've got people who really emphasize individual freedom to accumulate wealth and resources with very minimal government interference.
Minimal government.
Yeah. And then on the left, you have people who are a little bit more, focused on ensuring more equitable distribution of resources.
Right.
And so they might argue that, everyone has a right to a share of, the Earth's unowned resources or
Oh,
something
yeah.
like
And
that.
that's where you get into like the whole inheritance
Exact-
debate.
Yeah.
Like, do you have a right to pass on your wealth to your kids?
Does a child inherit the full right to their parents' wealth?
Right.
Or does society have some claim on that wealth
Yeah.
to redistribute it for greater equality?
Tough questions.
It's a big question.
And then there's Marx,
Oh,
who's
right.
got his own.
We can't leave Marx out of this.
No, we can't.
He's a central figure in this whole discussion of equality.
Right. He had that famous distinction between those two phases of communist society,
That's right, yeah.
where like the first one was
The first one operates on the principle of to each according to his contribution.
Right. So you get what you...
So you get rewarded based on how much you've contributed.
Yeah. So that's kind of meritocratic.
In a way.
Yeah.
But Marx saw this as a transitional phase.
Right.
And the higher phase is the one that really captures the imagination of, philosophers.
Okay.
And that is the idea of to each according to his needs.
Ooh.
And now what does that even mean?
Right. What is a need?
Yeah, what are needs? Who gets to decide what constitutes a need?
Right.
How do we balance individual effort with collective responsibility?
Yeah.
It's a lot.
So much to unpack there.
There's also just straight up money, like income and wealth.
This is the one that I think a lot of people think about
Right.
when they think about equality.
It's like the most obvious one.
Yeah, it's the most tangible one in a way.
Yeah.
You know?
It is.
Money is what lets you do things.
Yeah, it represents freedom
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, money represents effective freedom.
Right. But
The more money you have, the more choices you have.
Right. But then the question is like, to what extent do
Yeah.
we interfere to make that?
Yeah, how much do we interfere to make it equal?
Yeah.
Some people might say that, it's a violation of people's liberty to force them to share their wealth.
Right.
Other people might say that, allowing vast inequalities to persist undermines the whole idea of equal moral worth.
Yeah.
It creates a system where some people have way more power and influence than others.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a trade-off.
It's another big...
There are always trade-offs.
Yeah, another big question.
Big question.
Another philosophical dilemma.
Absolutely.
So we've been talking a lot about resources when we talk about equality of condition.
Yeah.
Like focusing on wealth and income and stuff like that. But
Right.
the entry kind of pushes us to think beyond that a little bit.
Yeah, it gets even deeper.
Yeah. Even for a philosophy fan.
Deeper, yeah.
So one of the things they bring up is this idea of capabilities and resources,
Yeah.
which what if instead of focusing on like who has how much money,
Right.
we focus on like what can people actually do?
Yeah, what can they actually do with what they have?
Yeah.
And this brings us to Amartya Sen.
Okay.
And his famous capability approach.
So this is about like more than just having stuff.
Yeah, it's about what you can actually do with it.
Yeah.
It's about having the freedom to live a life that you value,
Right.
So Sen argues that what really matters is not just the resources people possess,
Yeah.
but what they are able to do with those resources. He calls these capabilities.
Capability.
And so, two people might have the same income,
Okay.
but one person might face significant barriers in converting that income into genuine opportunities.
Right. Like maybe they have a disability.
Exactly.
And so they need additional resources.
Yeah.
To even get to the same level of functioning.
Yeah, like accessible transportation.
Yeah.
Or adaptive technology. Yeah. Or, someone might face discrimination.
Okay.
And need, support to overcome societal barriers.
Yeah.
So Sen focuses on what he calls basic functioning capabilities,
Okay.
which are essential for a decent human life.
Okay. So this is like the bare minimum.
Yeah, it's like the baseline.
Yeah.
So this would include things like being adequately nourished, having access to healthcare and education,
Okay.
being able to move about freely, participate in society.
Right. It's like making sure that everyone has like
Just like giving everyone
the tool,
tools,
Yeah.
the tools and support to
Yeah.
build a good life,
regardless of where they started.
regardless of their starting point. Yeah.
So this capability approach seems like a pretty cool way to think about equality.
Yeah, I think it expands our understanding of equality.
It's not just about the money.
It's not just about the stuff.
Yeah.
It's about what you can actually do.
And it's about the freedom to like live
Yeah.
a life you find meaningful.
That's
But I imagine it also has like its own philosophical baggage.
Oh, of course.
Right.
Critics of the capability approach might say, well, how do you define a basic capability?
Right.
Is there like a universal list that applies to all people
Yeah.
in all societies?
Yeah. Or there's this very...
Cultural differences?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even measure a capability?
That's another question.
Yeah.
How do you measure it?
And then there's that question that always comes up, which is
Yeah.
personal responsibility.
Right. What if someone has the capability to achieve something,
Yeah.
but they choose not to?
Right.
So that's, a big question.
So it's a really interesting,
It's a great framework
yeah.
for thinking about these issues.
Now, alongside that, there's also the resource perspective,
Right.
which is, kind of goes back to the idea of resources.
Yeah, it's still about resources.
Yeah.
But it's a more refined approach.
Okay.
So philosophers like Ronald Dworkin.
Um, argue that we should focus on those resources that would allow individuals to pursue their own conception of the good life.
Okay, so not just like...
Not just handing everyone the same amount of money.
Right.
It's about making sure that they have what they need to overcome disadvantages,
Okay.
due to factors beyond their control.
So this would be like being born with a disability.
Yeah, or growing up in poverty.
Right.
And Dworkin actually has this really cool thought experiment
Okay.
where he imagines this hypothetical auction.
Okay. An auction.
Yeah, so imagine everyone starts with an equal amount of like social currency,
Yeah.
and they can bid on resources.
Okay.
And then after the auction, there's this hypothetical insurance market
Okay.
where individuals could protect themselves against potential misfortunes, like getting sick
Yeah.
or having a talent that's not highly valued in the marketplace.
Right. So everybody gets to start off equal,
Yeah.
and then they can insure themselves.
Yeah. It's like a safety net.
Yeah. Against bad luck.
Against bad luck, exactly.
But how do you actually translate that
Right.
into a real policy?
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
How do you determine what people would have chosen
Yeah.
in this hypothetical auction?
Right.
And real world markets are super complex.
Right.
You know?
So it's a thought experiment more than
It is more of a thought experiment.
practical guideline.
Yeah. But it's a really helpful one, I think.
So this resourcist view,
Yeah.
it seems like it's kind of bridging the gap between capabilities.
Yeah. In a way.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that people have what they need to achieve a flourishing life
Right.
as they define it.
But we're not just like giving them money
No.
for the sake of giving them money.
It's not just about handing out cash.
Right.
It's about making sure that they have what they need to overcome those disadvantages.
And then there's the whole idea of like equalizing welfare,
Right.
which,
This is where we get into happiness and well-being.
right, like how well is your life going?
Yeah, how satisfied are you?
Yes.
And so proponents of welfare egalitarianism argue that we should aim to equalize people's levels of welfare.
Okay, so everyone's got the same level of happiness.
Yeah, in theory,
But how do you even measure happiness?
that's the question.
And then there's that personal responsibility thing again.
Right. What if someone's unhappy because of choices they've made?
Right.
So should society be obligated to compensate them for that?
Right.
So that's where the distinction between circumstances and choices becomes really important.
Yep.
And that's where this idea of equality of opportunity for welfare comes in.
Okay, so it's instead of focusing on like
Yeah.
equalizing actual levels of welfare,
Right.
we try to equalize their opportunity to
We try to-
achieve well-being.
Yeah, it's about making sure that everyone has a fair shot at living a good life,
Right.
even if their choices and circumstances differ.
So we're helping people reach their potential,
Yeah.
but we're also recognizing that they have
Right.
a role to play.
Exactly.
It's a balance.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've really gone through a lot here in terms of equality of condition,
Yeah.
trying to equalize everything from opportunities to resources, even to happiness itself.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what if we step back a bit,
Okay.
instead of aiming for perfect equality?
Yeah.
What if we focus more on just making sure everyone has enough to live a good life?
Right.
The entry talks about some alternatives to straight up egalitarianism.
Yeah.
And this idea of sufficiency really jumped out at me.
Sufficiency.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Instead of worrying about if everyone has the exact same amount,
Right.
it's more about,
It's about the baseline.
yeah, do you have enough
Yeah.
to meet your basic needs?
To live with dignity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just seems more grounded somehow.
Yeah, it's more realistic, I think.
Yeah.
It recognizes that there will always be some level of inequality
Right.
in any society.
We're not all going to be the same.
No, we have different talents, different choices. We're affected by different circumstances. But sufficiency is about making sure that there's like a floor
Yeah.
below which no one falls.
So it's like a safety net.
Yeah, it's a safety net.
Yeah.
It's about, making sure everyone has the essentials.
Yeah.
The food, the shelter, the health care, the education.
So then how do you define enough?
Right.
I mean,
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
What's enough for one person might not be enough for another.
right. And like,
And what's considered enough
Yeah.
in one society might be totally different in
Yeah.
another society or a different time period.
what are the like essential ingredients of a good life?
Right.
Is it just bare subsistence?
Yeah.
Or does it go beyond that?
Does it include things like, access to education,
Yeah.
meaningful social connections,
Mm-hmm.
opportunities for creative expression?
Who gets to decide that?
That's another question.
It's a lot to figure out.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a big question.
So some people would say just the bare minimum.
Right. The minimalist approach.
Yeah. Just what you need to survive.
Yeah.
And then other people would say, no, it needs to be more expansive than that.
Right. It needs to include these other aspects of human flourishing.
What do you think?
I mean, personally,
Yeah.
I'm drawn to the more expansive view.
Okay.
I think it captures more of the richness of human life.
Yeah.
But I also recognize the challenges of actually defining and measuring those more intangible things.
Right.
It's not easy.
And then there's the whole question of, okay, even if we agree on what enough is, how do we get it to people?
Right. How do we actually implement this in the real world?
Do we just hand out money?
Do we have some kind of universal basic income?
Yeah.
Or do we take a more targeted approach?
Right.
And try to provide specific resources and support?
It's hard.
There's no easy answer.
Yeah, there's no easy answers.
But I think one thing we can do
Yeah.
is to develop some kind of objective indicators
Right.
of well-being.
So we can at least measure it.
Yeah, we need to be able to measure it.
Yeah.
So things like life expectancy, infant mortality rates, access to education and healthcare,
Right.
indicators of social inclusion.
Right.
These are things we can actually track and see how we're doing.
And it gives us something to work towards.
Yeah, it gives us a goal.
And then there's another alternative to egalitarianism they brought up, which is this idea of priority.
Right.
So instead of trying to make everyone equal,
Yeah.
we prioritize helping those who are worst off.
The most disadvantaged. Yeah.
It's like triage.
It's like triage in an emergency room.
Right. The most urgent cases.
Yeah, you treat the most critical patients first.
It just seems like morally.
Yeah, there's moral urgency to it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But then again, the question is like, who is worst off? Is it just about money?
Is it just about income?
Yeah.
Or is it about other things too?
Yeah.
Like health, social connections.
Right.
And how much priority do we give to the worst off?
Yeah. Do we completely ignore everyone else?
Right.
Or do we try to strike a balance? Yeah. It's a tough question.
So even when we have these principles,
Right.
it's not always easy
No, it's never easy.
to put them into practice.
Yeah. The real world is messy.
And then they bring up one more alternative, which is desert.
Ah, desert.
Yeah.
The idea that people should get what they deserve.
It's like you reap what you sow.
Exactly.
It makes sense.
It has a certain intuitive appeal.
Yeah.
Right?
Like if you work hard.
If you work hard, you should be rewarded.
Yeah.
If you're lazy, you might face some negative consequences.
But how do you measure that?
Yeah.
Can you separate what people choose to do
Right.
from just the circumstances they were born into?
How much of it is really their fault?
Yeah.
And even if you could measure it perfectly,
Yeah.
what do you do with the people who are deemed undeserving?
Right.
Do we just abandon them?
Do we just leave them?
Yeah.
Tough questions.
Yeah, these are big questions.
So we got sufficiency, priority, desert.
Yeah, a whole buffet of
A
options.
whole buffet. Which one do you like the best?
Well, as a good philosopher, I'm not going to tell you what to think.
Of course.
But I think it's important to consider all of these different perspectives
Right.
and reflect on your own values.
Yeah.
There's no one right answer.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
Yeah, going through all of these different ideas about equality.
Yeah, we've unpacked a lot.
Yeah, we've really dug deep.
And we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for hours.
You could do a whole series on this.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for people to continue exploring these questions on their own.
So one final thought for you all out there.
Okay.
Imagine you had the chance to design a perfectly egalitarian society.
An egalitarian utopia.
Yeah, utopia.
Yeah.
What would it look like?
What principles would guide it?
Yeah, and what challenges
Yeah.
would you face in creating it?
That's something to think about.
Yeah,
It's a challenge for all of us
it is.
to create a more just and equitable world. It's an ongoing process,
It is.
and we all have a role to play.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into egalitarianism.
It's been a pleasure.
It has been fun.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you later.